founders and financing, raising money, goes hand in hand sometimes. But how do board members, especially if you're an investor, handle disputes and resolutions over executive management? So, and then we're going to talk about transition too. Maybe we'll cover that in the same thing. When you transition, we're going to talk about transition of board members, but transition of founders, CEO. I know with ATI, we dealt with a lot of CEOs who were engineers and scientists who then move over to become CTOs because you got to bring somebody in to run the business. It's a fairly normal activity. That goes well sometimes, doesn't go well sometimes. How do board members get involved with that, stay involved with that? If you could use some examples, that would be great too.
I'll jump in and just say that this goes to the therapy part that he mentioned, because if the board member sees clearly, maybe, number one, are you the only person on the board that thinks you see clearly about a change that needs to happen? Or is there consensus around the board that something needs to happen, either with the CEO or maybe with another C-team member? I just think you have to call on your best interpersonal skills to figure out how do you get that person to the same conclusion. So it just really goes back to effective communication. Maybe it starts with trust. So if you have developed trust with the CEO as a board member, they're more likely, because they don't want to hear it. As a general, I've seen in my career, it's people, and this is your CFO or your CMO, and the board is saying they've got to go, and you don't want that to happen because you like that person, or you just don't see it yet. So it really calls on the board member to use their best skills and to try to get the CEO to get to that same place. And it, in most cases, if it takes an extra couple of quarters to do that, I think that's better than ramrodding something down immediately. I have seen situations where VC firms have behind the scenes started talking to other CFOs and things like that. I think that is rough. I mean, maybe that will work, but then, that's just going to be a lack of trust. If the VC goes, starts talking to someone in Austin about, another role, and the CEO has not even decided to open up that role, that's a problem. So I want to say, so that's really all I can say is this is that trust that Krishna talked about. This is get the CEO, if it's one of his team, to come around to it. And certainly if it's the CEO that's the problem, that's a whole other situation there. And then just make sure that your board members are all aligned with that. I wanted to say one other thing that jumped into my mind with the last conversation. We're still kind of talking about that relationship. So I spoke to a CEO in the last couple of years at a private company in town. It's not a Live Oak company. And they were very frustrated.
Feel free to disclose the name of
it. No. It's not. I promise you. But they were very, very frustrated with the board member that was put on their board from the last fundraising raise. And, we won't go all into that, because certainly there's all different facets of why that is. It may be the right person, wrong person. They just need to work on things. But fundamentally, my advice to the CEO, I said, you have to remember that you bought this. You can't, he wanted his cake and to eat it too, is basically. He wants to raise all the money and then just leave me alone. And so I think that to the extent that you're that board member that gets put on, or you have CEO friends, or perhaps you're CEOs, really think about, really early on when you're thinking about raising money, start to think about who you want in the boardroom and what that role needs to be and all that, because you can fund your business with your credit card if you want to and not worry about a board. And that's what I taught you. Did you do that? No, you didn't do that. Okay, you took someone else's money, get your, just get going on it. So there's a little bit of tough love there on that, but I don't think that he realized that really early on.
Oksana, I'm sure you have had some of these conversations.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's I really love how Lynn had presented this, because that challenge, the challenge of growth. If you think about this fundamentally when we talk about startup, one of my favorite quotes about startup equals growth. And we usually think about growth in numbers and customers and revenue. First and foremost, the growth of the humans that are at the foundation of it, and growth sounds good on paper, but actually is quite challenging when you have to go through this, and that requires you to change how you've done things. So to me, what I usually talk with my portfolio companies, and also I've seen in the boards I've served on, adding an element of clarity where you really paint a very clear picture. This is how the company at the super startup, like the kindergarten stage, looks like. But when you're going to be in the secondary school part of business, this is what it would look like, and this is how your role will change, and would you really even enjoy this role? And if you would want to have that role, these are the skills it will require. So I find that often you could, it's still going to be quite personal, because in a startup situation, it's a baby of this person often. It's like identity is aligned for all of us entrepreneurs, like we are so tight with our business. But the more you outline, this is how the growth and the growth of the skills would look like, and this is how you go in from influencing through action to like influencing through people, and this is how you delegate, and that becomes part of your performance evaluation, which I think is a really big part of the board. Every board I sit on, I feel like evaluating the performance of the management team is a big part of the guidance. Even if the CEO holds a controlling package, that's the role of the board, and we have to negotiate around that. And when you do have that dialogue, then it offers you an opportunity to offer the step functions. This is what you have to be here, but on this next horizon, you either need to be that or hire that. And I think that, in my experience, had to personalize that. And if you truly get that, like Krishna, like trust is such a paramount, because when you choose, like, what do you enjoy doing? What do you enjoy doing? Do you enjoy building? Because maybe you should give reins here and have someone else do that. And luckily, we have a fantastic example. And all I have to say, think Larry and Sergey versus Eric Schmidt. Do you think, because that's an example that really drives the point home, because it's without argument for most of those that Google would not have been Google without either. Like Larry and Sergey is the quintessential founding team. They didn't really love to manage, and they are the soul of the product. But they were not they did not have a structure and the guidance and the metrics that needed for Google to become the dominant force. And you as a founder will earn more, and your equity will be more valuable if you find a way to check your ego at the door and hire the specialists you need. And so that, to me, like the earlier we get this dialogue, and also you cannot have that dialogue with everyone. So when I consider writing a check or joining the board, I really explore and probe whether the person is, whether the person has a propensity for that growth that will be required for my check to work well and for this leader to evolve. Because if you're not, then I think it may seem good on paper, but it will never work.
I've always said 50, 40, 30% of something is bigger than 100% of nothing.
Yeah.
So it's, okay, so what about transition of boards? You were talking about Disco, and instead of stepping down from the board when it went public, they asked you to join. So this happens all the time, right? Series A, Series B, Series C, you have new investors, and you go from a less mature company to a more mature company. How does that work, even in a public company, when you transition board members? How does it work?
A good example is HomeAway in the very early days when we were still private. We had like 3 board members from Austin Ventures. So 3 out of the 7 was from Austin Ventures. Well, that clearly is pretty weighted.
They were dominant in their day, those Austin Ventures.
They were, absolutely, and very important to HomeAway's success early on. And so I think that so much just goes back to interpersonal and having conversations early. It's really about, okay, when we raise this next round, you know that the people we raise the next round, they're going to want somebody on the board. So, okay, guys, we can't, we got to figure out, we need one of your seats, because we're going to, so you start that, and the tough thing is the CEO might have a point of view of who they want that person to be, the person they feel like is the most helpful to the business or helpful to him, but the individuals may be in a different pecking order and may be able to make that decision between themselves. And so it's tricky. They may say, I really want this person to stay, But I suspect it's not going to be him because it's going to be someone else because everybody still wants to stay. So you start early with conversations, very objectively, without waiting until, okay, we've raised this money now and we have 2 new board members, you've got to go. So you start this, you don't raise money overnight. You're raising money over quarters and over the years. So I think just as she's talking about a team, about how you see the evolution of an executive team over the growth of the company, just layer in how you see the evolution of the board. Start talking about it early. People start thinking, it becomes a little bit less taboo to talk about when the time comes. And then when those spots open up, the other thing is the CEO just, in our case, at Humway particularly, really just said we need somebody with certain skill sets. So when we're looking for independent directors, we want someone who's international, or we want someone that comes out of the vacation industry or the IT, whatever it was. And so he was very kind of strategic about thinking about, we kind of have these skill sets on the board. So he was ahead of his time. Now we all do those matrices to say, do we have something of everybody on the board? Well, he was really just, and with the help of the executive team a little bit too, whenever he would just talk about it, he was kind of already doing that. He was like, this person is real helpful for this. This person is really good, really works with our product guys. This person is good, works with Lynn. What we need is this over here. So I think start early, communicate directly and explicitly. Don't make assumptions that change is going to happen. Be very explicit, and then try to be strategic about the skills and abilities that you put on the board.
And I just say one too, on top of all of that, giving the calendar trigger to invite that dialogue is useful. So what I found is a tool that you could bring in from nonprofit and university board is the board term, right? Which is a natural conversation, natural invitation to have that dialogue, so that you could have the dialogue about the composition of the board and who steps in, who has out, and board members are semi-expecting that they're leaving at that point in time. So you have the legacy. Not everyone gets invited to come to the second term. And that's a very useful tool to deploy, I think, across all boards. Obviously, if you're an investor and that's stipulated with the term sheet that had been written, it's not quite the same, and the next investor might take care of that. But as the board gets bigger with an independent board members, nothing in this life is forever, and neither is the board term. And if you have that board term laid out as a part of board training and board governance and the board structure, that lends a very natural, it's not personal, I don't like, the shirt or the tie you wore to the last board meeting, so bye-bye, or something less. I'm attempting a poor joke, but I think the point is it makes it an objective structural thing that the board will evolve. It will evolve at this time. There is a nominating committee that will evaluate it at this point in time, and you may or may not get invited because you need that spot for someone else.
And going from a very small company, friends and family, et cetera, to a Series A, you're actually getting venture capital in. Is that, that's it's a very big step in terms of board creation. And so talk a little bit about that, and maybe an example or two. The two of you guys, you've been in this for a long time.
Yeah, it's obviously you're defining a formal board for the first time. You take the first institutional round. And typically, at the time you have the one or two founders and the one investor board member. That's a typical construct in those instances. At the time the founders and the venture investor are getting their bearings right, just in terms of how do you really establish this trust business? How are you going to work together? And I'm thinking about constantly, look, when we invest in a company, it's very much a bet on the founders. The founder, or at least a principal founder or the founders, are going to make it work forever, is how you think. So at the time, what you want to do is to augment them with talent. If the person's got a tremendous product expertise, you might want to augment them with sales and marketing. If they got a tremendous, they're a visionary about the industry. You think about what do you augment. So you're thinking about augmenting them, and so you're trying to build this ability to understand what is that founder's strengths and weaknesses, and team building as a part of that, as a big part of it. And as a result, it's difficult to add one more, say, an independent in the mix so early in the equation, because they're truly defining how the operating cadence or the collaborating cadence with the founding team, with the leadership at the time. And often, and so that hopefully that marriage works well, and it's part of the trust developing part here, and so on. And then the next round, what happens typically is then the new money comes in, gets dictate, well, let's have one more investor board member, and maybe at the time you start to contemplate what an independent might look like. Along the way, you found smart people, domain-rich people who have been there in the industry, and so on. And now you really think about how do you want to augment the CEO with some executive help in some specific areas. Maybe it's a domain knowledge person, or has been a really experienced CEO, and so on. And you start now infuse that expertise into the board, maybe in the second or third rounds of financing. And then maybe, as you go forward, you don't want to keep adding a new venture lead into as a board member. If you have 5 rounds, you'll have 5 venture investors, and that's just too many, I know. So as a result, you start to peel off some relevant people as a part who have led some rounds of financing, depending upon their value add. That becomes a negotiated thing, and then the CEO's got to say on which of these people do we really want on the board or not. It just becomes a more of a nuanced conversation through multiple rounds of financing here. And so that's typically how things evolve, and often the evolution happens from investor board members based on new money speaks. And then there is, the 1 to 3 outside board members who are not affiliated with money is often a function of chemistry meets domain knowledge and expertise. Often, if you're thinking about going public, you want to have a, head of audit who's someone who looks like Lynn. You start to add to the mix here as a part of going public, or all things you start to contemplate here in the evolution of boards for a company.